Let's see. Load, then activate. Load, then activate. Or sometimes it's just activate? Let's figure this out. Here's your flight fix.
I'll talk us through it, okay? And we'll do it together.
Welcome to the Cirrus Approach Flight Fix, the bite-sized flight training show dedicated to pilots who never stop learning. You know, once you've done it a few times, the process for loading an approach is actually pretty straightforward. With your flight plan already loaded, press the Procedure button, then highlight Select Approach and press Enter. This brings you to the Approach Procedure Buffet, or if you want to get all technical, the Approach Loading page. Here, all of the approach procedures for the selected airport are listed out like one delicious approach buffet. Pick the one you want, select how you want to transition onto it, and then determine whether you want to load or activate. And that's it. Call it a day. Thanks for playing.
Not quite.
What's that you say? There's more? Okay, fair enough. I totally agree. I think there is more. I'd agree that there's kind of a discussion that we need to have here about best practices for actually choosing the best approach and transition. But before we dig in any further, let's
Go to the hangar.
Although the actual pushing of buttons, that sequence, although that remains pretty consistent from one approach procedure to another, the when, the where, the why, and the how of loading and activating really doesn't. Right off the bat, there's a couple things that should almost go without saying. Now, the first one, you need to have a current navigational database. But second, if the procedure you're looking for doesn't exist in your database, don't think that you can manually load the fixes and kind of build your own approaches. That's such a bad idea. Loading an approach that's in the database puts the procedure at the end of the active flight plan without interrupting your current flight plan. On the other hand, selecting Activate will essentially give you a shortcut to load and activate the approach, which means you'll not only add the procedure to the end of your active flight plan, but you'll also begin to immediately navigate to whatever initial fix you selected. Okay, so when do you load an approach? Well, we're getting there, but first, let's support the show. This episode of the Cirrus Approach Flight Fix is brought to you by the Cirrus Aircraft IFOM, the Interactive Flight Operations Manual that's so nice they made it twice for both the Garmin Perspective and Avidyne Integra line of Cirrus SR Series airplanes. With text, interactive widgets, and beautiful video demonstrations, you'll get up to speed quickly on the safest procedures and best practices for SR Series flying. It's the perfect addition to your digital flight kit and is part of a well-balanced breakfast. Available now on the Apple iBook Store. It's a fact that flying an IMC increases your workload. So the earlier you can complete a task, or in this case, get the approach queued up for when you do need it, the earlier you can do that, the better. A good spot to kick this whole process off is when you've reached the top of descent, or when you're, let's call it 20 minutes from your destination airport. This action of leaving that en route mindset and initiating your descent towards your destination serves as a great reminder, or really a cue, to get the current weather and establish your approach plan. Once you've listened to the arrival airport's ATIS, which, by the way, will include the approaches in use, or once you've received the weather and you know what approach you want, well, I'd say let's go ahead and load the approach. Here's where things get a little gray though. You don't always know how ATC will transition you onto the approach, but you can make an educated guess based on your local airport knowledge, or maybe even just the fact that ATC will usually assign you the transition that makes the most sense. In other circumstances, you might get radar vectors. The secret here is load the approach using the transition that makes the most sense, even if you expect radar vectors. Why, might you ask? Well, you can activate vectors to final from any approach, regardless how you loaded it. So think of it kind of as your twofer, your two for one. If ATC sends you to any fix along that transition route that you've loaded, well, you've already got it loaded. So in pilot jargon, we call that a win.
Winning!
Yes. On the other hand, if ATC initiates vectors to final, there's a double bonus. You can do that too through an always available universal activate vectors to final shortcut. And since you were extra smart and loaded a transition from the get-go, you'll get even more fixes available to you than if you'd only loaded the approach initially via vectors. That's another win. So, load the approach using the transition that makes the most sense for your flight path, even if you anticipate vectors to final. Next, when do you activate the approach? This is important, this is big. You need a trigger. Generally speaking, the trigger for activating an approach is when ATC finally commits you to that approach. You can kind of think of it in terms of two trigger scenarios. One, when they start you towards the initial approach fix. That's usually going to be as a proceed direct to. Or two, when they initiate vectors to final with a turn to that first vector heading. In either of these two scenarios, it's time to activate. With the approach loaded via your desired transition, press the procedure button and select either activate approach or activate vectors to final, whichever is appropriate per ATC instructions. And so there you go. Load the approach as soon as practical using the transition that best suits your intended flight path. Remember, this gets you that 2-for-1. And once ATC commits you to the initial approach fix, or once they've initiated those vectors to final, activate the approach. As always, we want to hear from you. We want to get the global Cirrus community talking at us, so let us know what you think. Send us comments, questions, biting critiques, or loving praise to learning@cirrusaircraft.com.
Hey everybody, Ryan Conrad here. I'm an aviation insurance broker out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm also a Cirrus standardized instructor pilot. Right now I'm in our Cirrus SR-22 at 7,000 feet heading back from a meeting. It's beautiful out, not a cloud in the sky, and no turbulence. So it's perfect. Remember, learning's a lifestyle, and we'll see you at the next fix.